Shiro. I'm a clinical, very, very happy and excited to be to you today within the framework of the World Happiness Fest, a celebration that we have every year. And today I'm talking in the context of health and mental health, which is a key element for us to get to a better world, to a happier world, into a world with more consciousness and happiness for all. I'm going to be talking about the reconnection and the regeneration that happens after collective trauma. Trauma and adversity has been always a part of the human experience. We've never had to look very far to find suffering in the world. We're going through a pandemic, we're going through war, unfortunately, natural disasters, socioeconomic, geopolitical conflict. The world can be very unpredictable and very uncertain. In response, people always want to find a way in how to handle and how to face adversity. And collective trauma, which is something that we are experiencing more lately, can be attended to by collective healing. Collective trauma can serve as a connector, as a reconnector to make us stronger, more empathic and compassionate. We can come out of an experience of trauma with a greater sense of purpose, with our priorities in order. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the things that I'm talking about, like what is collective trauma, for example. Here we are. So, reconnection and regeneration after collective trauma. What is collective trauma? Collective trauma is any catastrophic event or major disruption that brings about suffering to individuals, to families, to communities around the world, for which people have no way of defending themselves or resources in the face of adversity. The impact that a collective trauma has on relationships of families and communities is major. One of the things that collective trauma does is isolation, is breaking and shaking the foundation of relationships with ourselves, with others, and relationships in communities, in nations, in the world. The best example that we have now is what we've been going through with the pandemic. It's one of the things that has made us more isolated, more disconnected, and more with more difficulty to face the traumas and the conflicts that we go through. What happens when we start healing the collective trauma, and when we start healing this, we can transform it in what I call post-traumatic growth. What is post-traumatic growth? Is a positive transformation as a result of adversity, is a positive psychological change after facing extreme life challenges. This usually happens with extreme situations and not with everyday difficulties. We can come to a collective healing in the context of collective trauma and in the context of collective growth. That means that people do not heal in isolation. People heal in relationships, especially if there are groups of people that are going through trauma, especially if there are communities, entire communities that are going to trauma. The way to tackle it, the way to face it, the way to transform it in collection, is in collectivity, also is in relationship as well. So what does that mean? We have to understand that trauma is in the context of what? Of the individual with itself, but the person is always in the context of some culture that comes from some family of origin, base, in which stage of the life cycle, what religion or faith, what socioeconomic level, sexual orientation, gender. These are all different systems and subsystems that define, that inform how the healing is going to happen. Why is it important to think about post-traumatic growth and this transformation in the context and in the face of collective trauma? Because if we see adversity and challenges as an opportunity, we can see it as a springboard for transformation. We also can hold this idea of going through difficulty with hope, because we know on the other side there's something positive and good that comes out of it. We can offer growth, the real possibility. We can think about expanding ourselves and opening to new experiences. It's not an automatic result. So why it's important to know that post-traumatic growth can happen is because we have to work on it. We have to process it. We have to do something about it. It doesn't just happen by chance. Also, it's not something that happens immediately. It usually happens in steps and in progress that I will talk to you about in a moment. And if this process is rushed, if this process is pushed without really taking time to understand it, to accept it, to incorporate it and integrate it, we can become even more re-traumatized, and we can become even worse than how we started. So very important to be mindful of what it can do if we know the stages. So these are the 5 stages that I have developed in my model of post-traumatic growth. And it's 5 stages that can take us from a very traumatic experience, be it individual, relational, collective, and takes us into wisdom and growth. Radical acceptance, safety and protection, new narrative integration, and wisdom and growth. What does radical acceptance mean? That means right here, right now, pausing and understanding that we are going through some symptoms, some experiences that are informing us of a trauma, of a challenge, of a difficulty, is the first step in healing it. So one of the things that has happened in the last couple of years with the pandemic, with the virus, in the global society that we live in, and now with, unfortunately, wars, we can recognize what it's doing to our relationships, to our families, at the level of education, at the level of work, at the level of technology, in our teenagers, in our older population. It creates a shatter of the basic beliefs, basic assumptions of the world. In the understanding of how we were functioning, how we used to function, it no longer applies. So the step in order to change it and to transform it is accepting it. But not just accepting it, but radically accepting and recognizing that this is a difficulty, this is a trauma, this is adversity. Becoming aware and acknowledge it's happening. And in that way, we can validate and identify how we feel about it, with the feelings that come up with it, thoughts that we have about it, in recognizing not only what it's obvious and explicit, but also what's implicit and what is invisible. So the invisible wounds at the level of relationships, at the level of society, when we talk about microaggressions, when we talk about discrimination, when we talk about racism, when we talk about losses that have not been healed at the level of the family, at the level of the community, all of this can generate more loss, more isolation, and more disconnection. So being able to accept that is a first step in this growth. The second step is safety and protection. What does that mean? That either as a person or as a collective, we have to create a container to become safe, to start trusting again in one another, to be able to have permission to be human, to be vulnerable, to have transparency in how we feel about it, to allow for difficult conversations. So instead of pretending and avoiding and that nothing is happening, bring to the table what's bothering us. How are things difficult? Why 2 nations have to be at war, for example? How is work, health changing because of the pandemic? And how are the families reconfiguring because of the pandemic, for example? These are conversations that might be difficult to have, differences in political opinions, differences in identity. How do we open for conversation instead of close, and how do we make these conversations expand and make it safe to trust one another. Then we have the third step, which is new narratives. So what does that mean? That means that we can redefine our priorities. We start to understand that maybe something important before, it no longer is. Maybe we were focusing more on material goods. Maybe we were focusing on more of economical issues, or maybe we were focusing on keeping boundaries. And now we can understand that reconnecting with other human beings, paying attention to everyday relationships might be more important. Maybe paying attention to education, to our existence and our other people's life might be more important now. How do we rebuild and regenerate these relationships becomes a main focus after we go through collective trauma. How do we write new stories ourselves and others? How do we connect not only with our present stories, but with our ancestral stories? How do we go from our connection with us, with our present, and how we project into the future? How we rewrite our own identity in order to recreate something new, something that has been put it together and integrate it differently. Usually we can do that through art, through music, through dance, to poetry, something that takes us beyond words, to movement, moving and not staying stuck in the isolation. The fourth stage is, and in integration, we put together the old trauma with the new story. We break the cycle of trauma, we break the cycle of repetition of what hasn't been helpful anymore. We stop this transmission of a trauma from generation to generation. We start talking to our children about a different kind of world. We try to understand what it's like to see the world from a different perspective, maybe not using violence, maybe not using aggression, maybe being able to open for communication and conversation, and defining relationships in a different way. How do we go from fragment into a sense of belonging? So one of the things that trauma does is creates a sense of disconnection from others. In this stage of integration, bringing back to belong to groups, to different communities, to different environments, and having a sense of that identity is extremely important. So actively choosing groups to share, to belong, to create spaces in which we can start sharing again is very, very important, is key to reconnecting and regenerating and healing. And the stage, which is the most important stage, is the stage of wisdom and growth. This is where we really begin to appreciate life from a different perspective, when we establish relationships that are more meaningful, when we have a stronger sense of self and resilience because of everything that we've been through, and we see we can handle it. This is where we become more spiritual. And by spiritual, I don't even mean religious. I mean by we are connected with something bigger, with our higher self, with that there's the awareness that there's something bigger than ourselves, which is a very important piece of the healing. When we have, usually people become more aware of their purpose in life, new meaning. There are new possibilities. It's that, we start to see how people, for example, nowadays are changing jobs, are deciding to change their routines, to move to different places, to start different relationships, to have new interests in life. We become more conscious, deeper consciousness in who we are and how we are in the world, how we present in the world. Some of the things that really help growth at the individual level and at the collective level, obviously, is practices, full meditation practices, a clear intention to reconnect with others by talking on the phone, by using technology, by creating moments and spaces to reach out friends, to family, to new people, to others that might share interest. Rebuilding community, be a leader in creating a new place, a new activity, something new in a community for yourself. Use the use of art, music, dance, movement always breaks us free from for being stuck and from being frozen, and opens up for growth. Establishing new rhythms and routines in the community that can allows from get away from fragmentation and dissociation and disconnection. Um, Usually connecting to a spirituality that makes sense to you, that makes sense to your community, and really devoting time to develop a sense of spirituality that takes us to something bigger than yourself. And of course, having an open mindset, having a growth mindset, being aware that there's more than one possibility, more than one solution. Being open to different experiences allows us to flow and to move into a new place. As we go through this adaptation, into this change, into a growth, into reconnection, something very important is to reach out to colleagues, to mentors, to other friends or people that we see that are role models for us, to share with people around us, in peers, at work, at school, in our own family, in our friends. To have a lot of self-compassion and self-care is key in this transformation. Like having less judgment, less criticism, and more awareness. Compassion is very important. Be aware of triggers, not from clients, from other people, that takes us back into. Always consider the context in which we are moving. Our cultural context, our socioeconomic context, our identities, in how we are establishing this healing and this growth. Remembering that we are social relational beings. We are social relational beings. We are not living in isolation, and we are not in disconnection. So we need not only the physical, but the emotional connection, the intellectual exchange. These are all important keys into the healing. And that healing comes in connecting with others. That's how we heal. I want to leave you with this quote that says, "The mystery of life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding this process must move with the flow, must join it and flow with it." And this comes from a movie, the movie Dune, and the book Dune, that I really, really loved. How it's a great example of adaptation and transformation. Thank you very much, and I hope that we can reconnect, that we can keep the conversation going. Feel free to text me, write to me, send questions, comments, and I'm here